Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of 2024 of the Canyon City Historic Preservation Commission regular meeting. Welcome, everyone, and we'll start with attendance.
Okay, roll call. Lauren Flick,
Here.
Chris Jenkins,
Here.
Lester Lamone,
Here.
Mike Madone,
Here.
Rich Millard,
Here.
Jim Nelson here, Millie Wentz.
Here.
We're all present and accounted for.
Everyone's here today. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes of our last meeting on December 20th? Are there any questions or changes that you would like to add?
I move we approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Who's second? Oh, Rich? Okay. On approving the minutes, Lauren Flick,
Yes.
Chris Jenkins,
Yes.
Lester Lamone,
Yes.
Mike Madone,
Yes.
Rich Millard,
Yes.
Jim Nelson, yes, Millie Wentz.
Yes.
First item on today's agenda is the 2024 Commission reappointments. Lisa?
Yeah, so we had two reappointments, and we received letters from both of you, Chris Jenkins and Millie Wentz, and City Council approved those reappointments for the commission for this next year at their last meeting.
Okay. So we need to elect the commission officers. To start off with any discussion, if we need some, but first will be the vice chair. So if there's any comments or a motion to appoint, we are open to do that. Are you volunteering?
I would volunteer my service as vice chair again for the next year, 2024 year.
Do we have a motion, or do we have someone else who would like to consider that position?
I move we reappoint Lester Lamone as the vice chair.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call?
Lauren Flick,
Yes.
Chris Jenkins,
Yes.
Lester Lamone,
Abstain.
Mike Madone,
Yes.
Rich Millard,
Yes.
Jim Nelson, yes, Millie Wentz.
Yes.
And that passes. Lester, thank you again for taking on that position.
Thank you.
Now we will discuss the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. Mike, are you interested in stepping back into that position if you have a little more time on your hands?
I think you've been doing a fine job, and I would actually make a motion that we reappoint Chris Jenkins as chair.
I think I'm open to more discussion if there's any.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion on the table.
Roll call, quick.
Lauren Flick,
Yes.
Chris Jenkins,
Abstain?
Lester Lamone,
Yes.
Mike Madone,
Yes.
Rich Millard,
Yes.
Jim Nelson, yes, Millie Wentz.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate
Vote of
the
confidence.
support.
Vote of confidence is what it is.
I guess we'll continue in this vein for another year. Let's see, moving on, the selection of our commission officers, already done that. Feather flag
I
discussion.
think we have to do
Did we-
secretary.
Oh, sorry, I just automatically assumed that you take that, Jim. Do we have a discussion on secretary?
Oh.
Jim, are you open to continuing that?
Yes,
I make a motion that we appoint Jim Nelson as the secretary.
I second that motion.
Roll call?
Lauren Flick,
Yes?
Chris Jenkins.
Yes.
Lester LeBone,
Yes.
Mike Bedone,
Yes.
Rich Ballard,
Yes.
Jim Nelson, I'll abstain. Millie Wince.
Yes.
Okay, and that passes. So we now have our officers and the commission again. So I appreciate everybody who participates in this group. I think that we have some important work to do, and I think there's always more we can do, but at least having this commission, I think we have discussions that were not being discussed in years past, so I think that I think we're still a fairly new commission, but I think we're moving in the right direction. Now we can move on to the feather flag discussion. What do we have going on with that?
I will lead this up.
Okay.
We have a case for discussion, I guess, about feather flags on Main Street. We've been in conversations with business owners over the last several months about feather flags. We thought we'd bring it before the Historic Preservation Commission, since we are working with a historic district downtown. And we are trying to get as much feedback as we possibly can, and from citizens, from business owners, from the commission, to be able to put together what we believe should be the case for feather flags, whether they're accepted or not. To give you the background, feather flags traditionally have not been allowed in the Central Business District. They are a special review, permitted application. You can use them temporarily, and it's as so defined in the code. During COVID, when businesses were shut down, certain businesses were allowed to be open, but people coming through town had no idea who these businesses were. They assumed everybody was shut down. So the city permitted, overlooked, I guess you could say, allowed feather flags so that people could see when a business was open. The feather flags were then, they were not discontinued, we'll put it that way, until 2023, in about August, I believe it was. The city began to reinforce the code that feather flags were not allowed, and they were being used permanently by businesses downtown. That was a violation of code, and Patrick Mulready, our planner, who's here with us tonight, can explain a little bit more about that. But he and I met with business owners downtown at the Downtown Business Alliance meeting to talk about feather flags and explain why they are not allowed. They've come back to the city with a new ordinance, a proposed ordinance that will allow them. And we thought it'd be a good idea to bring it to you as well, to get it in terms of get your thoughts in terms of Historic Preservation Commission. We're not asking for a vote. It's more of a general temperature, I guess you could say, of the commission toward feather flags. So I'll hand it over to Patrick. He can give you more details on the code itself and where we are now and where we're going, just to get your thoughts on this.
So if you've never heard the term feather flag sign before and you aren't real sure what that means, a feather flag is basically a sign that's got kind of a long spine associated with it, and it kind of curves at the top, and then there is a piece of cloth that gets attached to that spine that displays some sort of a message, a printed message of some sort. In our code, feather flag sign, well, all signs are tied to regulations by zone district. And in the CB Central Business District, which for Main Street is roughly between 1st and 9th Street, feather flags are not permitted at all. Elsewhere in the city, in general commercial, for example, they are allowed as a temporary kind of sign. They are not intended to be year-round. So when I was instructed after council ended the COVID emergency in early 2023 to resume enforcement of feather flag signs, we had some merchants who were very pleased with the fact that they were getting to use them and they wanted to continue to be able to use them. And so they have approached council and wanted to be able to continue to use them while this discussion was going on. Council has granted a moratorium, and that moratorium has been extended a couple of different periods. This conversation with the merchants is continuing. As Rick mentioned, they did come up with a draft ordinance, and in this draft ordinance, feather flag signs not only would get bigger in the maximum height that they would be allowed, but they would essentially be allowed year-round as basically a permanent fixture, even though they are considered under the sign code temporary. So we presented our reasons for why we disagreed with their draft of an amendment to the sign code. Council, rather than moving forward with it, just wanted us to go back and, again, assess the community's opinion about feather flag signs downtown, and I guess that's why we are here this evening, since obviously the Central Business District is the prime core of our historic core as a city.
I have one quick question. What are other communities doing in their downtowns concerning feather flags?
So, to the extent that they are allowed, what we're hearing is they are predominantly temporary in nature. If you've got a special event like a grand opening or a particular sale, you can have them out for a weekend, but they're not intended to be year-round.
And historically, that's what Canyon City's ordinance was drafted to not even allow them at all in the area from 1st and 9th Street.
Yes, and I would point out feather flag signs are a fairly recent type of sign to become very popular. So this is an issue that's only come up really, since the pandemic. I would maybe 2018, 2019 timeframe as well. But prior to the adoption of our current code, in the previous code, feather flag signs were not allowed either. It was the pandemic where we essentially relaxed the rules to help businesses out that I think created a perception that, okay, these signs are here for good. And when we resumed enforcement at the close of the pandemic, there was some pushback about that effort.
Let me ask a question, Patrick. Let's talk about temporary signage. So we've mentioned feather flags by name or by type in the Central Business District. What is the opinion of your office in terms of other types of temporary signage, given the width of our sidewalks and the areas in which we have infrastructure now that involves outdoor seating, for example, involves bike rack infrastructure, park bench infrastructure? What is, say, sandwich boards, for example, something that would go out by a merchant daily on the sidewalk and then come back in daily on the sidewalk?
So we've got a few different types of signs that are considered temporary in nature. Wall-mounted banner signs would be considered one. Ground-mounted banner signs, and these are typically used when you've got something going under construction and the construction company will post a banner identifying who they are and what's being built. Feather flag signs. We also have A-frame and sandwich board signs, which are permitted and do not require. They're not subject to getting a permit from the city. Those are permitted in the Central Business District. We have window signs as a temporary measure, but again, you're not required to get a permit for those. We also have what we call post signs and yard signs, and those typically amount to something like a for sale sign that someone will post in their front yard, something like that. We are also considering flag signs as an option to add as a temporary type of sign downtown. And we are also considering maybe some directory signage for downtown. But those are currently the types of temporary signs that are permitted in the sign code.
So as during the pandemic, as more restaurant-type merchants built outdoor seating to increase their occupancy, is there any development of any type of permanently affixed signage to railings now that are associated with those outdoor seating areas?
No.
Is there any regulation that governs that? because that's not affixed to the building, now it's affixed to the railing. The railing is probably not affixed to the building, and in some cases isn't affixed to the ground either.
No.
So
And-
how does the city intend to deal with something that would be a solution to that?
Well, again, I haven't noticed that there's a problem with signs being attached to railings. We would probably have to address that if it became an issue we were receiving frequent complaints about. But to the extent that people are putting signs in right-of-way, what the code says about that is they're not allowed. Now, we permit, I mean, Main Street from building front to building front is all right-of-way. We permit A-frame signs, for example, because they are fairly small in stature, they are easily portable, and from a pedestrian scale, they're easy to see, easy to spot. They don't generally take up much in the way of pedestrian room. The feather flag signs, on the other hand, do require some sort of apparatus to affix them to the ground. That's another subject of conversation we've been having with the merchants.
The reason I'm asking these types of questions is I want to make sure that if I'm asked to have an opinion, that my opinion is broad enough in nature so that it's, or does it need to be very specific? Are we only talking about feather flags as a temporary flag type, or are we talking about temporary signage? Now, you've talked about flags as being something that might be included in something like that. And I have noticed, for example, that feather flags are affixed to city infrastructure,
Yes.
namely trash cans, right?
Yes.
Because the trash cans are affixed, so they affix their flags to trash cans, and that can't be good for you either. So I guess what I'm trying to do is define the scope of what my opinion needs to be. Is it only, we're only talking about feather flags today, or are we talking about feather flags as they are related to temporary signage in the downtown district?
I think the scope of the discussion we're seeking from the Historic Preservation Commission is specifically in the central business district, what type of signage do you believe is appropriate and in keeping with the historic nature of the district?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for a little more background on the business thoughts, a lot of what we are hearing is that the feather flag allows their business to be seen from the road, people driving by. Whether that's the case or not, that's their argument, and I can see that argument to some extent. The challenge is it, when we start to talk about changing the code for this flag, you start to talk then about the impacts of changes on a plan that was made years ago through public discussion based on a certain look, feel, character of a downtown that really is somewhat designed to be a pedestrian area. Some people argue that cars come into town, they look for parking spaces, they don't look for businesses. They get out of their cars and they walk to the businesses. The businesses are saying that they are seeing increased business because there's feather flags out there and the cars going by can see it. And they also claim it's safer because people can see the feather flag and they're not looking for the building sign that is behind a tree or something like that. We have been doing some work on the trees to scale back the trees, but we're talking specifically about feather flags in this case, because that's the tool that's being used for signage. But the complexity is, and I shared this with the business owners too, we as a city can't dictate what goes on that sign. It's
Content.
yeah, the content
is
we can't
First
govern
Amendment.
that.
Yep.
And we also can't necessarily, if we're allowing feather flags, we can't necessarily objectively know when a feather flag needs to be replaced, whether it's too tattered to be there. Does a feather flag add to the character of downtown? Does a tattered feather flag add to the character of downtown? How do we enforce if it's a tattered feather flag and people believe it needs to be taken down? So there's a lot of enforcement questions that come with this too that are really rather complicated.
So really, we're talking about a question of scale then, because at a pedestrian scale, a sandwich board makes sense, right? Because I'm at a walking pace, I'm only as tall as I am. A feather flag is meant to be a larger scale, taller, more visible, and would be visible to traffic. And I think that's maybe one of the questions to be answered. Is this a question of scale then?
I would say yes, I think it is a question of scale. Point of information, when we adopted our Unified Development Code, all of our zone districts had basically an intent statement, a definition as to why the zone district exists in the code. The Central Business District's intent statement reads as follows. The CB District is intended to foster the continued economic vitality of Canyon City's historic downtown and to provide and preserve a central setting for pedestrian-oriented mixed-use development as well as cultural amenities. CB is the only zone district in our code that specifically mentions pedestrian orientation.
Well, and I think that's important. And I think that's, whether you're talking about business or historic district, we've always talked about downtown as being walkable, bikeable, pedestrian-oriented, slow-paced. Speed limit, slow-paced, everything is slow-paced. So I think that's important. I'm sorry, I've taken over the whole.
How many businesses have expressed this? Are we talking half of downtown? Are we talking half a dozen, 2 or 3?
Closer to half a dozen.
Yes,
Yeah,
about half a dozen.
I unfortunately have to head out in a few minutes for a ribbon cutting, but as the president of the Chamber of Commerce, we've kind of been caught a little bit in the middle of this as well, with a lot of business owners coming to us when this came up. So I have to kind of ride that middle ground. I can see the perspective from the business owners for sure, but I also understand the complexities of what it would mean if somehow that had to be codified to allow them along with the other signage. I think with all signs, there has to be some type of regulation. And to find that middle ground with the business owners that are concerned about the visibility of their business, mainly from driving, because like you said, it is scale. If you're driving your car up and down Main Street, especially visitors in the summer, you can't see sandwich boards that are in front of other parked cars. So that's the main concern that was brought to us, the Chamber of Commerce, by the business owners regarding the feather flags. They felt that was a much better way for people to find their business. And with the trees growing up, which was also mentioned, a lot of the traditional building-mounted signs are really hard to see until you're right up on top of a business. So I think to recognize there is a desire for businesses to be able to better advertise their services, balanced with where do you draw that line. It's not an easy answer. And what detracts from the quality of the downtown historic business district. Patrick had a really good presentation the last time I saw it with some of those optional building mounted signs, banners. Problem with that a lot of the times is businesses don't always, or probably rarely, own the building that they're in downtown. And with any of those types of signs, there would be additional restrictions or hoops they might have to jump through with the actual business owner, whether they would be allowed to mount or attach signs to the building itself, which is another issue with that. So that doesn't really answer anything, but that's just the perspective that I've been getting as the Chamber of Commerce from the business owners downtown. It is those that are concerned are passionately concerned about it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say is the answer for that.
And we get mixed comments from downtown. There's business owners that don't want them. They just don't like them. They don't think it's our character downtown. There's business owners that they don't care either way. But the most passionate right now are those that want them. and want to keep them.
Yeah, I haven't really heard from anybody that's vehemently opposed to them myself. It's more, they either don't care or they really are opposed to not being able to have them. So,
And we are talking about possibly doing another speed study. You know, your range of visibility increases when you slow down. And we do think that I know that people could tend to slow down downtown. I drive maybe 15 miles an hour when I'm going through there, and I stop when people are at intersections trying to cross the streets. I know some people don't. So there could be a little enforcement there as well, but we are talking about potentially speeds if we can have control over that, and alternate options for signage. But you're absolutely right. Some of this would require building owner involvement or participation, I guess, from this part of the business owner, and it would be more costly. We're talking about possibly allowing larger blade signs which project out from the buildings. So we're talking about a lot of different things as alternatives. The question really comes down to, is it part of, do they fit in our downtown historic district and the character of it?
I think that that's a good segue. Thank you for giving me that segue. I know we planned
Absolutely.
We planned it that way. Now, what I'd like to say is bring it back to just historic preservation for a moment, and let's not get into the weeds about whether I like feather flags or not. I think the downtown historic district benefits from a sign ordinance that talks specifically about signs attached to the buildings themselves and the character of the signs and the size of the signs and how those signs are used. That's what adds or detracts, I think, from the historic character of downtown, because that's affixed to a building. It's part of the building. It's part of that infrastructure, versus something that is temporary, that goes out in the morning, comes back in the evenings. There is a sense of busyness and vitality to something that is more mobile and changes often than is not. But I think that I would be more concerned if, from a historic preservation standpoint, if we were talking about permanently affixed signs and how permanently affixed signs affected the aesthetic and the historic nature of Canyon City than I would be a temporary sign. So I think that's my opinion.
Anyone else have any input or feedback?
You mentioned they wanted to increase the size of the sign. What are they looking for as far as height?
Well, I think they're already using the larger signs, right?
Yeah, they wanted it, one of the proposals included a 16-foot height.
I think did the code specify a certain height initially?
Well, the code limits it to 8 feet right now for.
But that's in the general commercial.
The districts
Yeah.
where feather flag sign
Where it's
will be
allowed,
permitted.
not downtown at
Yes.
all, though.
And again, that's to get up high above cars and above, so they'll be the most visible.
I agree with Lester. I see the feather flags as being more of a temporary sign, even if they're allowed to have them year-round. But affixing something to a building, that obviously is going to change the character of the building. A lot of the buildings downtown, kind of the way I look at it, is when they were originally built, the first floor storefront was kind of expected to be interchanged over time. I like to see the upper parts of the buildings preserved, but I feel like there should be some leeway in what happens to the lower portion. And maybe with these signs, I think getting up to 16 feet tall starts to encroach into that space on the upper part of the buildings. I think size would definitely be a factor, but as far as the signs themselves, I don't know that I would be opposed myself.
Personally, I think that you open the door that if you had 1 or 2 per block, that's one thing. If you've got 10 or 12 per block, then they start putting political flags out, or they start putting out whatever they want to say. That's where we obviously can have some issues, and allowing it without being able to restrict that, then you can't, you don't have any say as to what gets put on those signs. And personally, I think if they are going to change it, it should be on a temporary basis, and it should have a height limit, high enough to where you can see it from your car, but not high enough, 16 feet up. Certainly, I wouldn't be in favor of that. But personally, I mean, they did fine for throughout time, as long as it's not impeding traffic. I see both sides of it, but I also see that opening that door could create more headaches down the road that you would have to address. But I think if it's on a temporary basis, I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but it has to be enforced as far as the condition. If it's, been sitting out there in the sun for 5 years, or and takes away from it. But then you open the door for, like I say, 10 or 12 a block. You have one there, so I need to do it because you can't see my business as well, and it goes right down the street. So I think you have to weigh all of those things in. But personally, I don't think I'm in favor of them. I think before COVID that people were able to find the businesses, and I think they will again. So that's my position.
I certainly would also go on record by saying 16 feet that's second floor territory, and that's people's living rooms and people's offices, and I would not be in favor of super tall. But that's the only other comment I think I would make. I don't know that you could restrict the number, because then it's first come, first served, or you got to get back in line every month or every 6 months or something like that. So I'm not sure that that's practical, but that's your headache, not mine. So.
It's a complicated discussion. It really is.
I guess I would, having listened to all this, I'm wondering if the Preservation Commission is maybe supposed to be limiting its role to preserving and not concerning itself with the use of the historic district. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I guess I do wonder if it's our place to get involved with signage, if that's more of a city council or city government role than the role of the Preservation Commission. I guess I'm personally opposed to them, but at the other hand, there are a lot of things that go into the appearance of the historic district, like paint colors and all kinds of architectural considerations that you could say, well, I don't prefer that, but is it really the role of the Preservation Commission to have a say on the use of the district? So I don't have an opinion on this, but I guess just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and there's no action requested or required, it's just more discussion, so that's probably a good part of the discussion. Good question.
I think it would be good to give some consideration to the overall signage in a historic district. The signs we have currently on the street don't lend themselves to historic considerations. They could be a little more appropriate. There was an era where Main Street, and you could see it, you used to be able to really see it in Durango, where Main Street had a kind of a look of a certain kind of a sign over the door of a building. Those were deplorable. Just really detracted, I thought, from historic downtown areas. But I think we might give additional consideration to appropriate signage for the downtown historic area and how that would relate. So this is, in a way, part of a perhaps larger dialogue. I agree that 16 feet is too high, and that feather flags for special occasions or unique circumstances may be appropriate, but continued use and reliance on this is probably not appropriate for a downtown historic area.
I think that everyone has shared our thoughts on it, so I guess we'll see how it proceeds on your end.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, number 8, or excuse me, number 7, an update on New Method Laundry. Do we have any additional information since our last meeting?
Yeah, the letter that I shared with you, I submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office. They responded pretty quickly, really, with zero consideration, really, of the letter. They thanked me for the letter. They understand our thinking. But I could say that the gentleman kind of punted and said that the EPA didn't respond to him the way that he wanted the EPA to respond to him. And his letter really asked for no response at all. So the EPA, our representative is Greg Davis. He had a conversation with the architect at the SHPO office, and the impression that we had is that we could apply that this project is not creating a significant impact on our historic district because the building is not contributing. It didn't matter at all. He said there is an impact. So there's no ifs, ands, or buts. On the state side, historic preservation says there is an impact and it needs to be mitigated. So the EPA started to prepare basically, we'll call it a remediation plan that would require a memorandum of agreement between the EPA, the State Preservation Office, the Commission, and the city to agree to how the demolition would take place and what the remediation would be of the historic character of primarily the neighboring building. The city administrator is and I will be speaking to the director of the the State Historic Preservation Office tomorrow to, I guess you could say, argue our point again that we have a very emergent issue with this building and the additional time it may take to go through this, possibly another 3-month process, isn't acceptable. So we'll see where that goes tomorrow. That's our plan tomorrow. And if that doesn't get us anywhere, then we will go back to the EPA and start to talk about what steps we will take to remediate. It will possibly involve any work that be done to the demolition needs to be reviewed, or anything that has to be done for remediation needs to be reviewed by the commission and approved by the commission. We're not sure about that yet. We'll see what the conversation brings us tomorrow. We think they honestly don't realize the need and the emergent need of this building. So we'll see where it goes tomorrow. But I've contacted Mr. Madone about being involved with our conversations for demolition and remediation of the wall, repair of the wall at least, and he's agreed to participate in that. We do think it'd be a great, as a mason, he's gonna be a great asset for the engineers involved with this. The RFP process is out. The request for proposals is out on the market now. Supposed to close on the 29th for demolition. And we won't be able to do anything with that until we get through this state historic preservation issue. But we'll know more tomorrow where that goes, so I'll have another update on the next meeting. And you'll probably be hearing something soon about progress on the demolition side of things. So that's where we are right now. Nothing new other than just a status update. Happy to take questions, comments.
Is it of any benefit at all for this commission's president to accompany you to any of these meetings as a representative of this commission during these conversations? To get more of the local opinion or pulse of this commission, or to represent this commission, since it's obviously sort of a tool in the mix from somebody's perspective? Is that something that would be helpful?
What are you doing tomorrow?
Well, I'm the vice chair.
Well,
But if the chair appoints me, I suppose.
Well, I think Mike's going to take part in it, is that correct?
Well, but is Mike taking, well, what I'm trying to do is to make sure that there's not too many hats on one person. So
Yeah,
if he's a contractor or mason consultant for the city in this project, maybe somebody from the commission not associated with the project would be a more, I don't know, just trying to clean up the hats in the room.
yeah, that's a good question. I hadn't thought of that, and I'm not sure Ryan thought of that. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know if, the sense that I got from their response was that it wouldn't matter one bit. They're standing, they have their thoughts, and they're gonna stand with that. I don't know.
I just didn't
It's a
know
good question.
if there was an opportunity for them to have a voice in the room that is not the city. Now, this is obviously an appointed commission by the city commission, but I don't know. Again, just trying to think through voices in the room and who needs to be represented, and if any of those opinions, if they could be asked directly, would be beneficial to the discussion. Because if they want this commission to be in the middle of either a review process or a step-by-step review or an approval process or something
Right.
of that, then shouldn't this commission have a voice in that conversation?
It could be a good idea. I would like, I mean, the call is tomorrow at 11 o'clock in the morning. I think it would be helpful if one of you did participate to get a walk through the building.
Okay, so either,
Are you available tomorrow?
I can be available tomorrow morning at 11.
Okay. I think that Lester has indicated he's willing to at least sit in the meeting, and if feedback from
Okay.
our commission is needed, certainly he'll be there to give it. Like you said, I don't know if it'll make any difference or not. but-
Yeah, let me confirm with Ryan. I didn't set up the call. I'm not sure what the context is, but so I'll confirm with you in the
Okay.
morning.
All right,
But yeah, you might want to plan on a visit before we go.
okay,
So
All right.
I'll let you know.
I'll
I'll let you
be-
know early.
I'll be available.
Okay.
Thank you, Lester.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Could
you,
be a very
Rick.
good idea.
Patrick. Anything else? All right, general announcements, Lisa?
Upcoming webinars and training opportunities. And next week is already the Saving Places Conference. I know a couple of us will be attending in person and a few of you virtually. As part of that, we did get the scholarship grant funding for this. So the people who are going to be participating in the conference, if you can write down the sessions that you attend for reporting purposes, and the 3 takeaways that you get from the conference, please write those down or we can report on those at our next commission meeting. So we're in compliance with the scholarship funding. Another webinar that's going to be available or coming up in February 21st, the CLG will have a webinar on Denver in context, and you can register for that webinar via the CLG portal. And the one in March is March 20th, Colorado Heritage for All is that webinar. And all of those webinars through the CLG portal are usually scheduled at noon during the lunch hour, and they're free. If you're interested in those, I can give you a link to the CLG training portal. And those are the ones I'm aware of at this time.
And is that everything you have? Anything else that anyone would like to add, or any input from the public? All good? Okay. With that, then, let's see, our next meeting will be on,
Wednesday, February 28th at 4 PM.
okay. With that, I will adjourn today's meeting. Thank you.